Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation on the hardest places to live in Skyrim. First up is Winterhold. Winterhold is what remains after approximately 80% of a major city collapsed into the Sea of Ghosts during an event creatively titled The Great Collapse. This occurred in 4E122, roughly 80 years before the events of Skyrim, when a series of storms and earthquakes caused most of the city to simply fall off the cliff into the ocean below. What you're left with is a handful of buildings clinging to the edge of a continent like a man hanging from a rope made of denial and poor urban planning. The population of Winterhold now consists of exactly 8 people. 8. The Jarl of Winterhold technically governs a hold that spans a significant portion of northern Skyrim, but his actual city is smaller than most bandit camps. You have a Jarl, a steward, an innkeeper, 2 shopkeepers, and 3 other residents who apparently looked at the ruins of a city that fell into the ocean and thought, yes, this is fine, I'll stay. The only reason Winterhold maintains any relevance whatsoever is because the College of Winterhold sits on the opposite side of the bridge, and the college didn't fall into the ocean, which makes it the overachiever of local architecture. Now, the college itself is a functional institution for mages, which sounds promising until you realize the entire population of Winterhold blames the college for causing the Great Collapse in the first place. So if you're planning to live here, you get to choose between living in the destroyed city that hates the college or living in the college that's hated by the city. Either way, you're picking a side in a decades-long passive-aggressive standoff where one side has 8 people and the other side has literal fireballs. The climate is exactly what you'd expect from the northern coast of Skyrim. Constant blizzards, freezing temperatures, and wind that makes you question whether exposed skin is even worth having. The nearest location of any significance is a 10-minute walk through a snowstorm to reach a frozen coastline where horkers will absolutely maul you for interrupting their day. There is no economy. The Frozen Hearth Inn exists, which means you can technically get a drink, but the only commerce happening in Winterhold is the college occasionally buying supplies, and even that's stretching the definition of commerce. The infrastructure is non-existent because most of it fell into the ocean. There are no walls, no defenses, and nothing preventing the next storm from finishing what the Great Collapse started. Most people would look at a city where the ground disappeared and decide to relocate literally anywhere else, but not you. You're going to try to make it work in a place where your house might not exist tomorrow. Truly inspiring. Next up is Morthal. Morthal is a small settlement in the marshlands of Hjalmarch Hold, which is a polite way of saying it's a collection of wooden shacks surrounded by a swamp that wants you dead. The town sits in the middle of wetlands populated by shorus, spriggans, frostbite spiders, and various other creatures that consider your presence an insult worth correcting with violence. The architecture is exclusively wood and thatch, which means everything is damp, everything smells like mildew, and everything will eventually rot. Living in Morthal is like choosing to spend your life in a basement that floods every spring, except the basement is outside and there are vampires. Speaking of vampires, Morthal has an active vampire problem that the local government is doing absolutely nothing about. A woman named Alva is a vampire who has been murdering townsfolk and turning them into thralls for her master, Movarth Pakeen, who operates out of a nearby lair. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. This is a documented fact that you can verify by doing roughly 15 minutes of investigation. The Jarl's response to multiple suspicious deaths and a literal vampire walking around town is to do nothing until an outsider solves the problem for her. Stellar leadership. If you're keeping track, your neighbors include a blood-drinking predator and several people who are too incompetent to notice. But don't worry, it gets worse. The entire population of Morthal is also being plagued by nightmares, courtesy of Varmina, the Daedric Prince of Dreams and Nightmares. There's a skull artifact in a nearby tower that's actively siphoning the dreams of every resident in town, causing them to experience horrific visions every single night. So not only are you living in a swamp with vampires, you also can't sleep properly because a Daedric Prince is farming your subconscious for power. Everyone in Morthal is sleep-deprived, paranoid, and stumbling through their days like zombies, which would be concerning if half the town weren't already undead thralls. The town itself has minimal defenses, no walls, and a Jarl who seems genuinely surprised that bad things keep happening. Idgrod Ravencrone is technically the leader, but her primary qualification appears to be having visions, which is not translated into actionable governance. The economy is non-existent. There's an inn, an alchemy shop, and a few houses where people live out their short, miserable lives before being murdered by vampires or dying of despair. Fishing and alchemy are the only industries, which makes sense because the marsh is full of ingredients, assuming you survive long enough to harvest them. Most rational people would look at Morthal and recognize it as a mistake. A settlement that should have been abandoned generations ago, but persists because a handful of stubborn Nords refuse to admit they built a town in the worst possible location. But here you are, planning to move into the vampire swamp where you'll never sleep well again. Congratulations, you've chosen damp misery with a side of supernatural torment. How pathetic. Moving on to Dawnstar. Dawnstar is a mining town on the northern coast of Skyrim where absolutely nobody is sleeping well, and I mean that literally. The entire population is being tormented by nightmares every single night because a priest of Varmina is using the skull of corruption to harvest their dreams from a nearby tower. Every resident in Dawnstar goes to bed and immediately experiences horrific visions of death, failure, and trauma, then wakes up exhausted and goes to work in the mines anyway. This has been happening for weeks. Everyone knows something is wrong. Nobody is doing anything about it. They're just accepting that sleep is now a secondary source of psychological torture and moving on with their day. The symptoms are exactly what you'd expect expect from a town-wide sleep deprivation crisis. People are irritable, paranoid, and physically exhausted. They complain constantly about the nightmares, but continue to operate the mines, run the shops, and maintain their routines as if chronic insomnia caused by Daedric interference is just another inconvenience, like bad weather. The Jarl's solution to this problem is to do nothing and hope it resolves itself, which is perfectly in character for Jarl Skald the Elder, a man whose leadership strategy appears to be ignore problems until they become someone else's responsibility. Speaking of leadership, Skald is a Stormcloak loyalist whose primary concern is the civil war, not the fact that his citizens are being psychologically tortured every night. He's more interested in complaining about the Empire than addressing the literal nightmare plague affecting his hold. This is the kind of governance you can expect in Dawnstar, a Jarl who will prioritize political posturing over the mental health of his population. Truly a man of the people. The location itself is brutally exposed to the northern coast, which means constant freezing winds, snowstorms, and zero natural defenses. Dawnstar has no walls, minimal guards, and is surrounded by hostile wildlife, including ice wraiths and frost trolls. If you're attacked, your options are to hide in a building or die. The town's economy is entirely dependent on the quicksilver and ironbreaker mine, which means if you're not a miner, your employment options are limited to working at the inn or the general goods store. That's it. That's the entire job market. But wait, there's more. Dawnstar is also home to the Museum of the Mythic Dawn, a collection of cursed artifacts from the cult that nearly destroyed Tamriel during the Oblivion Crisis. The museum curator, Silas Vesuvius, has been actively collecting these items and displaying them in town, which is the equivalent of opening a museum dedicated to a terrorist organization and filling it with their weapons. Several of these artifacts are demonstrably cursed. This man is hoarding evil relics in a residential area, and everyone just lets it happen. Oh, and the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary is nearby. The most infamous assassin organization in Tamriel operates out of a location close enough to Dawnstar that you could walk there in 20 minutes. So not only are you living in a nightmare-plagued mining town with no defenses and terrible leadership, you're also neighbors with professional murderers. Let's be real. Most people would leave Dawnstar after the first week of nightmares, but not you. You're going to stay in the sleep deprivation capital of Skyrim and pretend everything is fine, while a Daedric prince farms your subconscious and assassins live down the road. I'm sure that'll work out great. Next up is Riften. Riften is the crime capital of Skyrim, and I don't mean that as an exaggeration or a colorful descriptor. I mean the city is functionally governed by the Thieves Guild and Maven Blackbriar, a businesswoman whose list of criminal enterprises includes extortion, smuggling, contract killing, and owning the local meadery that produces Blackbriar mead. The Jarl, Lila Lawgiver, is a puppet who genuinely believes she's in charge, which would be adorable if it weren't so pathetic. Maven Blackbriar runs Rift. Everyone knows this. The guards know this. The shopkeepers know this. Even the Jarl's own steward knows this and occasionally tries to hint at it, but Layla is too incompetent to notice. The Thieves Guild operates openly out of the Ratway, a series of tunnels and sewers beneath the city that house not only professional criminals, but also skooma addicts, murderers, and people who have simply given up on life above ground. The Ratway is accessible from multiple points throughout the city, which means there's an entire criminal infrastructure network literally underneath your feet at all times. If you live in Riften, you are living on top of a dungeon full of people who will absolutely rob or kill you if given the opportunity. Above ground, the situation is only marginally better. Riften's marketplace is infested with thieves. You will get pickpocketed. This is not a question of if, it's a question of how many times per day. The Thieves Guild has eyes everywhere, and their primary business model is stealing from anyone who isn't paying protection money to Maven Blackbriar. If you open a shop in Riften, you pay the guild. If you own property, you pay Maven. If you exist in Riften for any length of time, someone is extracting money from you through legitimate or illegitimate means, and the distinction between those two categories is purely academic. The city's economy is built on three pillars: Blackbriar meadery, fishing, and crime. The meadery employs a significant portion of the population and is owned by Maven, which means your livelihood is dependent on the goodwill of a woman who has people killed for minor inconveniences. The fishery is run by the Thieves Guild. Even the Honor Hall Orphanage, which you'd think would be a safe institution for children, is run by a woman who abuses the orphans until someone murders her. Everything in Riften is corrupt, exploitative, or both. The guards are on Maven's payroll. The Jarl is incompetent. The Temple of Mara, which should be a bastion of love and compassion, is surrounded by criminals who use it as a convenient landmark for illegal dealing. The only functional institution in Riften is the Thieves Guild, and their functionality is dedicated entirely to stealing from you. If you're not a criminal, Riften is a nightmare. If you are a criminal, Riften is paradise. But if you're planning to live there as a law-abiding citizen, you're delusional. Most people would recognize that a city where the government is fake and organized crime is the actual power structure is not a place to settle down and raise a family. But here you are, planning to move to Riften and pretend you can live a normal life, while the Thieves Guild picks your pockets and Maven Blackbriar decides whether you're allowed to succeed. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you'll get lucky and Maven will ignore you, or maybe you'll end up in the Ratway with the rest of the people who thought they could make it work. On to Windhelm. Windhelm is the capital of the Stormcloak Rebellion, which means it's the primary military target for the Imperial Legion during the Civil War. If you're planning to live in Windhelm, you're establishing residency in the headquarters of an armed insurrection against the Empire, which is approximately as safe as building a house on a battlefield and hoping nobody notices. If the Stormcloaks lose the war, and all evidence suggests they will, Windhelm gets sieged, occupied, and Jarl Ulfric's Stormcloak gets executed. Your home becomes a war zone. But don't worry, I'm sure your property values will remain stable during the military invasion. Assuming you survive the Civil War, you still have to deal with the fact that Windhelm is the most racist city in Skyrim, and that's saying something in a province where casual xenophobia is considered normal. If you're not a Nord, Windhelm does not want you. Dark elves are forced to live in the Grey Quarter, a dilapidated slum where buildings are crumbling and opportunities are non-existent. Argonians aren't even allowed inside the city walls. They have to live and work at the docks outside, sleeping in a warehouse like livestock. This is official policy. The Jarl's position is that Argonians are too dangerous to allow into the city, which is rich, coming from a man who started a civil war and keeps a serial killer as a neighbor. Speaking of which, Windhelm has an active serial killer called the Butcher, who has been murdering women in the streets at night. Multiple victims, multiple crime scenes. The guards know about it. Ulfric knows about it. Their response has been to do essentially nothing and hope someone else solves it. The Butcher operates with impunity in the Stone Quarter, and the local guards are so incompetent they accuse the wrong person and nearly execute an innocent man before you intervene. This is the level of public safety you can expect in Windhelm. A serial killer loose in the streets and a government too busy with a war to care about minor inconveniences like citizens being murdered. Ulfric Stormcloak himself is too preoccupied with his rebellion to govern his own city. The Grey Quarter is falling apart. The guards are understaffed and racial tensions are at a breaking point, but Ulfric's primary concern is liberating Skyrim from the Empire, which is admirable in a vacuum, except his city is deteriorating while he pursues his political ambitions. The Palace of the Kings is where Ulfric holds court and plans military strategy, which means Windhelm is a legitimate military target at all times. If you live here, you're living in a city that could be attacked by the Imperial Legion at any moment. The architecture is ancient and crumbling. Windhelm was built thousands of years ago, and it shows. Stone walls are cracked, buildings leak, and the entire city feels like it's one bad winter away from collapsing. The climate is brutally cold, even by Skyrim standard. Windhelm sits in the northeastern corner of the province where temperatures are consistently freezing and snowstorms are frequent. The wind howls through the stone streets constantly, which is either atmospheric or miserable, depending on your tolerance for frostbite. And let's address the obvious. Unless you're a Nord male who supports the Stormcloaks, Windhelm is hostile to your existence. If you're a dark elf, you're confined to the slums. If you're an Argonian, you're not allowed in the city. If you're an Imperial, you're the enemy. If you're a woman, there's a serial killer hunting you. If you're literally anyone other than a Nord who agrees with Ulfric's politics, Windhelm does not want you there and will make that abundantly clear through policy, violence, or both. Most people would look at a city that's simultaneously fighting a civil war, ignoring a serial killer, and enforcing apartheid-level racial policies, and decide to live somewhere else. But not you. You're going to move to the rebellion headquarters and hope the Empire doesn't show up with siege weapons. Extraordinary, I know. Next is Markarth. Markarth is a city carved directly into Dwemer ruins, which sounds impressive until you realize it means the entire city is a confusing stone maze where you will absolutely get lost and fall to your death. The architecture is vertically stacked, with bridges, staircases, and walkways connecting different levels in a layout that makes no intuitive sense. The map and compass are useless here, because everything is layered on top of itself. You'll spend half your time trying to figure out how to reach a shop that's visible 50 feet away, but requires navigating 3 staircases and 2 bridges to actually access. The other half of your time will be spent falling off ledges and taking massive fall damage because you tried to take a shortcut. Everything in Markarth is made of stone. The buildings are stone. The roads are stone. The beds are stone. Jarl Igmund will literally brag to you about how even the beds are made of stone, as if this is a selling point and not an admission that sleeping in Markarth is like sleeping on a slab in a morgue. The entire city has the aesthetic of a tomb, which is fitting because the Dwemer who built it are long dead and you're basically living in their corpse. But the real problem with Markarth isn't the architecture, it's the Forsworn. The Reach is the most dangerous hold in Skyrim specifically because it's infested with Forsworn, the native Reachmen who have been waging guerrilla warfare against the Nords for decades. They view Markarth as their ancestral capital and they want it back. This is not an unreasonable position. The Nords did conquer their land and force them out. The problem is that the Forsworn's method of reclaiming their homeland involves constant raids, ambushes, and attacks on anyone associated with the Nordic occupation, which includes you if you're living in Markarth. You cannot travel outside the city without encountering Forsworn. They are everywhere. Some of them are Briarhearts, warriors who have had their hearts surgically removed and replaced with briar seeds in a ritual that grants them enhanced combat abilities and also makes them terrifying. The city government is completely corrupt and controlled by the Silverblood family, who own the mines, the guards, and effectively, the Jarl. Thonar Silverblood runs Markarth through a combination of wealth, intimidation, and hiring thugs to murder anyone who opposes it. The Forsworn conspiracy questline proves this definitively. If you investigate a murder in the market, you discover that the Silverbloods have been funding Forsworn attacks to maintain political control, framing innocent people, and using Tidna Mine as a forced labor camp for political prisoners. The guards are complicit. The Jarl is either complicit or incompetent. The entire system is designed to benefit the Silverbloods at the expense of everyone else. Sidna Mine itself is a nightmare. It's a silver mine that doubles as a prison, where inmates are forced to work with no trial, no legal representation, and no hope of release. If you're arrested in Markarth, you don't go to a jail cell, you go to the mine. You work until you die, or until the Silverbloods decide you've served your purpose. The mine is run by prisoners and guards who are equally brutal, and escape is nearly impossible. This is the justice system in Markarth. Forced labor in a silver mine owned by the family that controls the government. And just to make things worse, there's an abandoned house in Markarth that contains a shrine to Molag Bal, the Daedric prince of domination and enslavement. The house is haunted and actively hostile. If you enter it, the door locks behind you, and a disembodied voice starts taunting you while the furniture tries to kill you. This is a known problem. The guards know the house is cursed. Their solution is to put a sign on the door and hope nobody goes inside. Stellar crisis management. Oh, and the Hall of the Dead, where citizens are supposed to be laid to rest, is being used by a cannibal cult that worships Namira, the Daedric prince of decay and repulsion. Brother Varulus, a priest of Arkay, is aware that something is wrong but can't prove it until you help him investigate. The cult has been luring people into the Hall of the Dead and eating them. In the place where you're supposed to honor the dead, there's a group of people having cannibal feasts. This is Markarth. Most people would look at a city with tribal guerrilla warfare, a corrupt oligarchy, forced labor camps, Daedric shrines, cannibal cults, and architecture designed to make you fall to your death and decide this is not a viable place to live. But here you are, thinking the Dwemer stonework is worth the constant threat of being murdered by Forsworn or eaten by cannibals. The beds are made of stone and the Jarl is proud of it. Truly, the height of civilization. Moving on to the Reach. The Reach is not a city. It's an entire region of western Skyrim controlled by the Forsworn, a tribal group of Reachmen who have been fighting a guerrilla war against Nordic occupation for decades. If you're planning to live in the Reach outside of Markarth, you're not moving into a settlement. You're attempting to establish residency in active hostile territory where the native population has sworn to kill every Nord and every collaborator they encounter. This is not hyperbole. The Forsworn do not negotiate. They do not accept surrender. They see you as an invader occupying their ancestral homeland, and they are correct, which makes your decision to live there not just stupid, but also morally awkward. The Forsworn operate out of camps scattered throughout the mountainous terrain of the Reach. These camps are fortified positions with archers, warriors, and Briarhearts, which are Forsworn champions who have undergone a ritual where their hearts are removed and replaced with a briar seed wrapped in magic. This process grants them enhanced strength and combat abilities, and also makes them one of the most terrifying enemies in Skyrim. The only silver lining is that if you're skilled enough to pickpocket the briar seed from a Briarheart's chest, they die instantly, which is hilarious in theory, but requires you to sneak up on a berserker warrior with a cursed plant for a heart and reach into his chest cavity while he's alive. I'm sure you're great at that. The Forsworn camps are led by Hagravens, which are former women who transform themselves into bird-like monstrosities through dark magic. Hagravens are grotesque, powerful spellcasters who can summon Atronach, cast destruction magic, and generally ruin your day with terrifying efficiency. They're also hideous to look at, which is fitting because they sacrificed their humanity for power and ended up looking like a bird that died in a fire and then came back wrong. If you're living in the Reach, you're sharing territory with Hagraven. Enjoy that mental image. The terrain itself is brutal. The Reach is a mountainous region with narrow valleys, steep cliffs, and freezing temperatures. There are no roads, no infrastructure, and no service. If you need food, you hunt or forage. If you need shelter, you build it yourself or take over an abandoned Forsworn camp, which is a bold strategy considering the Forsworn will absolutely come back and kill you for it. You're living in the wilderness with no support network, no medical care, and no backup if things go wrong. And things will go wrong because you're in Forsworn territory. The Forsworn have a legitimate claim to the Reach. Historically, the Reachmen controlled this region before the Nords conquered it. They were forced out, oppressed, and treated as second-class citizens in their own homeland. The Forsworn uprising is a direct response to centuries of occupation and cultural suppression. They're not mindless savages. They're an indigenous resistance movement fighting to reclaim their land, which means if you're living in the Reach as a Nord or anyone allied with the Nords, you're not just dealing with bandits. You're dealing with people who have a valid reason to want you dead. It doesn't make them less dangerous, but it does make your presence there significantly more uncomfortable from a moral standpoint. You cannot negotiate with the Forsworn. They will attack you on sight. They do not care about your intentions or your reasons for being there. You are the enemy. The only way to live in the Reach is to fight constantly, kill Forsworn regularly, and accept that you're living in a war zone where the locals view you as an occupying force. There are no cities, no shops, no guards, and no help. You're on your own in hostile territory surrounded by people who have replaced their hearts with cursed plants and who are advised by bird women who practice blood magic. Most people would recognize that attempting to live in a region where the native population has been waging guerrilla warfare for decades is not a sustainable life choice. But here you are, planning to set up camp in Forsworn territory territory and hoping they'll overlook your presence. Maybe you think you can reason with them. Maybe you think you can hide. Maybe you think you can fight them all off indefinitely. I don't know what your plan is, but I can tell you with certainty that it won't work. The Forsworn have been fighting this war for longer than you've been alive, and they're not going to stop because you moved into their mountains and hoped for the best. Next up is Labyrinthian. Labyrinthian is an ancient Nordic ruin located in the mountains of Hjalmar, and it is completely, utterly, and definitively uninhabitable by any living creature. This is not a settlement. This is not a town. This is a massive maze of crumbling stone corridors filled with Draugr, frost trolls, skeletal mages, and at least one dragon priest who will obliterate you with magic before you can finish asking yourself why you thought this was a good idea. Labyrinthian earned its name because it's a labyrinth. The entire structure is designed to be confusing, disorienting, and deadly. If you're planning to live here, you're attempting to establish residency in an ancient tomb where the previous occupants are still home and they are extremely hostile. The ruins are massive. Labyrinthian spans multiple zones, each filled with enemies that respawn regularly. Draugr patrol the halls in groups, frost trolls wander the exterior sections, and skeletal mages fire ice spikes at you from elevated positions you can't easily reach. There is no safe area. There is no rest zone. Every single room is a potential combat encounter, and the sheer size of the dungeon means you'll run out of healing potions long before you reach the end. Players who venture into Labyrinthian without significant preparation or healing magic frequently die here, and those are people actively trying to clear the dungeon. You're planning to live here. Let that marinate for a second. At the heart of Labyrinthian is a dragon priest, an ancient undead mage king who wields master-level destruction magic and can kill you in seconds. Dragon priests are among the most dangerous enemies in Skyrim. They're immortal, relentless, and equipped with powerful staves and shouts. Fighting one requires strategy, preparation, and significant combat skill. Living near one requires a level of suicidal confidence that honestly deserves recognition. If you somehow manage to defeat the dragon priest, congratulations. You've cleared out one room of a dungeon that spans an entire mountain. The Draugr will respawn, the trolls will return, and you'll still be living in a frozen stone maze with no food, no water, and no sunlight. Because let's address the logistic. There are no resources in Labyrinthian. No food spawns here. There's no water source. The only loot is ancient Nordic weapons and gold that's been sitting in urns for thousands of years. You cannot farm. You cannot hunt. You cannot fish. The only way to survive is to constantly leave the ruins to gather supplies, which defeats the purpose of living there in the first place. And even if you somehow establish a base camp in one of the chambers, you'll be sharing your living space with Draugr who wake up specifically to kill intruders. You are the intruder. They will wake up to kill you. But if Labyrinthian isn't enough for you, if you're truly committed to making the worst possible housing decision in Skyrim, there's always the Soul Cairn. The Soul Cairn is a plane of oblivion ruled by the Ideal Masters, a group of entities who collect souls and drain them of energy for eternity. It's accessible through Labyrinthian during the Dawnguard questline, and it is quite literally the afterlife for people who had their souls trapped in soul gems. The entire realm is a purple void filled with soul-trapped victims, hostile Wrathmen, skeletal warriors, and massive structures made of crystallized souls. The Ideal Masters drain your life force while you're there, not as a combat mechanic, as an environmental effect. Simply existing in the Soul Cairn damages you over time. The Soul Cairn has no sun, no weather, no natural features. It's an endless purple wasteland where souls wander in torment forever. There's a dragon trapped there who's been going insane from isolation. There are ghosts of people who died tragic deaths and are now bound to this realm for eternity. If you're thinking about living in the Soul Cairn, you're not just choosing the hardest place to live in Skyrim, you're choosing to live in the underworld. You'd be attempting to establish permanent residency in the literal afterlife reserved for tortured souls. This is beyond stupid. This is transcendent incompetence. Most people would look at an ancient ruin filled with undead and recognize it as a place to avoid, not a place to live. But you've considered Labyrinthian, evaluated its complete lack of resources, hostile undead population, an active dragon priest, and decided this is where you want to call home. Or maybe you've gone even further and chosen the Soul Cairn, a dimension specifically designed to torture souls for eternity. Either way, you've selected a location that is not just difficult to live in, but literally impossible for any living creature to inhabit long-term. Truly inspiring. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you'll figure out a way to negotiate with the Draugr. Maybe you'll befriend the dragon priest. Maybe you'll thrive in the purple void of eternal torment. I'm sure it'll all work out great. In conclusion, Skyrim is a frozen hellscape where even the safest locations are one dragon attack away from annihilation, and you should absolutely play it. Peace on planet Earth.